3 months after my wife Eleanor's funeral, I started sorting through the things she had left behind. Most of it was ordinary old letters, a few photographs, recipes written in her careful handwriting. Then I found something unusual. An old, worn passbook tucked inside a drawer. I hadn't even opened it yet when my eldest daughter, Maddie, walked in. She snatched it from my hands, flipped it open for a second, and then laughed with a kind of sharp, dismissive tone. "Dad, this is trash. Mom didn't have any money. Just throw it away." Before I could say anything, she tossed the passbook straight into the garbage like it was nothing more than a scrap of paper. I stood there in silence. My chest tightened not because of the book itself, but because of the way she spoke about her own mother. Cold. Almost like Eleanor had been a stranger. That night, I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I pulled the passbook back out of the trash and drove myself to Heritage Community Bank. I didn't expect much. Honestly, I only wanted to ask about it so I could be sure I wasn't overlooking something Eleanor had left behind. I handed the passbook to the branch manager, Robert Shields. He looked at it for a second, and the color drained from his face. Without another word, he locked the counter, picked up the phone, and made a quiet call. When he hung up, he leaned toward me and said in a low voice, "Mr. Harlow, please sit down. We need to call the police." 3 months after my wife Eleanor's funeral, I began sorting through the things she had left behind. Most of it was ordinary old letters, photographs, recipes written in her neat handwriting. Then I came across something different. An old, worn passbook. I hadn't even opened it when my eldest daughter, Maddie, walked in. She snatched it from my hands, glanced at it, and laughed with open contempt. "Dad, this is trash. Mom didn't have any money. Just throw it away." She tossed the passbook straight into the garbage like it was nothing more than a scrap of paper. I stood there, frozen. My chest tightened not because of the book itself, but because of the way she talked about her own mother. Cold. That night, I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I pulled the passbook out of the trash and drove to Heritage Community Bank. I didn't expect anything important. Honestly, I just wanted to ask about it, so I could be sure I hadn't overlooked something Eleanor had left behind. I handed the passbook to the branch manager, Robert Shields. He looked at it for a second, and the color drained from his face. Without another word, he locked the counter, picked up the phone, and made a quick call. When he hung up, he leaned closer and spoke quietly. "Mr. Harlow, please sit down. We need to call the police. I'm not telling this story so you can listen to something shocking for a few minutes and then scroll past. I'm telling it because sometimes the things people call trash are only called that for one reason. They want you to throw away the evidence. If you're still watching this, leave a comment and tell me where you're from. I want to know how many people out there have been misled by their own family. Someone smiling and saying, 'Just forget it. It's not worth it.' And then later you realize, the very thing they told you to throw away was the one thing that could have saved you. Some details in this story have been slightly changed to protect real people, but the lesson remains exactly the same. When someone rushes to tell you to throw away something that belonged to a person who has passed away, because sometimes they're not afraid of the old notebook, the dusty box, or the forgotten document. They're afraid of what's inside it. And after Robert Shields said the words, "We have to call the police," I understood something very clearly. Eleanor's passbook was not trash. It was a bomb. And I had just touched the trigger. My name is Frank Harlow. 3 months ago, I buried my wife, Eleanor, a woman who spent her entire life quiet and modest. She never liked showing off, and she especially hated the idea of money poisoning a family. The last thing Eleanor said to me before they wheeled her into the hospital still haunts me. "I'm sorry, that was it." No explanation, no reason, just an apology, spoken at a moment when I believed we had finally reached a quiet, peaceful chapter in our lives. After the funeral, the house split into two kinds of people. Maddie moved through everything like it was a checklist that had to be finished. Fast papers, belongings, signatures, decisions, efficient, quick, almost impatient to wrap it all up. Sophie was the opposite. Quiet, avoiding eye contact, walking around the house like she was carrying something heavy inside her chest, but didn't dare say it out loud. At the time, I told myself it was just grief. People deal with loss in different ways, after all. But when Robert Shields looked at the passbook and said, "We have to call the police," something inside me shifted. Suddenly, Eleanor's last words, "I'm sorry," felt different. Maybe she wasn't apologizing for leaving. Maybe she was apologizing because she knew something dirty was already inside our home, and she knew I would eventually have to face it. Even on the day of Eleanor's funeral, I could already see that my two daughters were standing in completely different worlds. Maddie was dressed perfectly, speaking smoothly, shaking hands with people like a coordinator running an event. She didn't cry much. Instead, she handled the process. Who needed to sign what? Who collected the flowers? Who held the house keys? Who picked up the death certificate? From the outside, it looked responsible, organized, mature. But when I looked into her eyes that day, something felt wrong. Maddie was so calm, so controlled, that for a moment, I barely recognized my own daughter. Sophie was the opposite. She stood quietly in the corner of the room, her hands clenched together, her eyes red, but fighting back tears. She barely spoke the entire day. Every time Maddie stepped in and said, "I'll handle it," Sophie just looked down, as if she were afraid that saying anything might make things worse. That night, Maddie said something that stuck with me, something that bothered me more than I wanted to admit. "Dad, don't dig into Mom's finances. There's nothing there to dig into anyway." At the time, it sounded like she was trying to help me. But now, after Robert Shields said we needed to call the police, I finally understood something. Maddie wasn't trying to give me peace of mind. She was trying to make sure I never looked. She didn't want me looking in the one place that mattered. A few days after the funeral, the house still smelled faintly of incense, and people were coming and going like a quiet, sorrowful marketplace. That was when a man knocked on the door. He introduced himself as Henry Sinclair, an old colleague of Eleanor's. Henry didn't stay long. He stepped inside, glanced around the room as if he were worried someone might overhear us, and then handed me a thick, sealed envelope. "Eleanor asked me to give this to you at the right time," he said. I asked him, "And when exactly is the right time?" Henry didn't answer directly. He just looked at me for a moment, his voice low and serious. "Don't trust anyone too quickly, not even the people in your own house." Then he added quietly, "And don't let anyone see you receive this." My chest tightened the moment he said that, because that wasn't something a man says when he's just stopping by to offer condolences. That was a warning. When Henry left, I stood there for a long moment, staring at the envelope in my hands. And that's when the realization hit me. Eleanor had prepared for a day like this. A day when I would be forced to choose between trusting my family or trusting the truth. That night, I locked the door to my study and finally opened the envelope Henry Sinclair had given me. Inside wasn't money. It wasn't a will like I had expected. It was a passbook from Heritage Community Bank so old that the edges were frayed and the cover had faded to a dull yellow with time. Tucked inside the passbook was a small piece of paper. The handwriting was Eleanor's. I recognized it instantly. The note had only a few lines on it, but each one landed like a slap. "Don't ask the front desk. Don't tell Maddie. Go to the downtown branch. Ask for the right person. Robert Shields. If they say there's no account, don't believe them. Read this sentence." Eleanor said, "The vault knows my name." I just sat there, staring at the paper. because Eleanor hadn't written it like a simple request, nothing like, "Please take care of this for me." She had written it like someone leaving behind a lifeline, a password meant to save someone's life. And in that moment, something became crystal clear to me. This passbook wasn't a keepsake, it was a key, and someone in my own house was trying very hard to make sure it looked like trash. The next morning, the moment I stepped out of my study holding the passbook, Maddie appeared in the hallway as if she had somehow sensed it. Her eyes landed on the book in my hand. She smirked. "Dad, you're digging through Mom's stuff again? That thing is ancient. Mom didn't have money." Before I could even say, "Your mother left this," Maddie kept going smooth, fast, almost rehearsed. "Mom lived frugally. She never had anything like that. You're grieving, Dad. You're just holding on to things. Don't make a big scene about this. People will laugh." It sounded like she was worried about me, like a daughter trying to protect her grieving father from unnecessary stress. But what I heard underneath was something else. She was trying to shut the whole thing down before I even had the chance to walk into a bank. I looked straight at Maddie. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply nodded, the way a tired old father might, exactly the kind of man she probably believed she could easily steer. But in my mind, one thought locked into place. If the passbook was truly worthless, Maddie wouldn't have been in such a hurry to kill it with words. I had barely turned to grab my coat when Maddie moved. Fast. Too fast, like someone who had been waiting for the moment. She stepped forward, snatched the passbook out of my hand, glanced at it for a split second as if confirming it was the exact thing that needed to disappear, and then said one cold sentence, "Dad, stop making a scene." And before I could react, she tossed the passbook straight into the kitchen trash can, one quick, decisive throw, the kind someone uses to get rid of evidence. Not their mother's keepsake. I froze where I stood. If she truly believed Mom never had any money, she would have just let me keep it and spared the argument. But she didn't. Maddie chose to make it disappear. She even pushed the lid of the trash can shut, turned back to me, and tried to sound casual. "Dad, just get some rest. Don't dig into this stuff." That was the moment it clicked for me. The passbook wasn't trash. Maddie was afraid I would take it to the bank. Right after throwing the passbook away, Maddie didn't stay to comfort me like a caring daughter would. She walked straight out onto the porch, phone already in her hand, like someone on the other end had been waiting. I stayed in the kitchen, but quietly moved closer to the window and looked through a small gap in the curtain. Maddie was outside, talking to a man I had never seen before. His car was parked right along the curb. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket, and he carried himself like someone used to doing unpleasant work. I couldn't hear everything they said, but a few pieces of the conversation reached me clearly. The man asked, short and rough, "Did you get it?" Maddie answered immediately, without hesitation. "Yeah, it's done. It's trash." The man gave a low, mocking chuckle. "Good. Don't let the old man take it to the bank." Maddie nodded, then turned and walked back toward the house as if nothing had happened. I stood there, completely still, because in that moment, one thing became painfully clear to me. Whatever was inside that passbook, it was important enough that strangers were already involved, and my own daughter had just helped them make sure it disappeared. At that point, I couldn't keep telling myself the comfortable lie that Maddie was just being temperamental. That passbook was being hunted, and Maddie wasn't acting alone. When Maddie walked back into the house, I glanced toward the hallway and saw Sophie standing there. I had no idea how long she'd been there. She didn't say a word. Her eyes were fixed on the trash can. Then they shifted to me. There was panic in them, the kind of fear you see in someone who has just witnessed something they know they shouldn't have. I stepped closer and spoke quietly. "Sophie, you know what's going on, don't you?" She flinched immediately and shook her head over and over. But her hands were gripping the edge of her shirt, so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She glanced quickly toward the door, the same direction where Maddie had been talking to the strange man, then whispered, like she was afraid someone might hear her. "Dad, don't ask. Maddie will lose it. God, lose it." And right there, looking at my youngest daughter shaking with fear in her own house, I felt something heavy settle in my chest. Whatever Eleanor had left me in that passbook, it was already tearing my family apart. Before I could ask anything else, Sophie lowered her head and said something that sent a chill straight through me. "I've seen her do that before, with that man." Then she stepped back, like she wanted to disappear from the trouble she had just stepped into. "Dad, please don't tell her I said anything." In that moment, I understood something clearly. Sophie did not know. She knew, but she was living in fear. And if my youngest daughter was afraid of Maddie enough to whisper in her own house, then Maddie was no longer just a stubborn daughter with a bad temper. She wasn't just a difficult daughter anymore. She was a danger inside my own home. That night, I couldn't sleep. The stranger's words kept hammering in my head. "Don't let the old man take it to the bank." Around 3 in the morning, I quietly got out of bed and went downstairs to the kitchen. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I stood there for a moment, staring at the trash can like it was hiding the truth from me. Then I lifted the lid. The smell of garbage hit me immediately, but I didn't care. I reached down and started digging through it quickly, the way a man might search for something that could save his life. And then my fingers touched the worn, rough cover of a small book, the passbook. I wiped the grime off the cover and opened the passbook, checking quickly to see if it had been torn or damaged. It was still intact. Eleanor's note was still tucked inside those lines telling me, "Don't tell Maddie and ask for Robert Shields," suddenly felt sharp as a blade. I stood there in the kitchen, gripping the little book in my hands, and one simple truth settled in my mind. If my own daughter had to throw this away, then whatever was inside, it was powerful enough to bring her down. The next morning, I was going to the bank, and this time, I wasn't asking anyone for permission. Robert Shields opened his laptop and logged into the system the way a man might open a vault, not just a normal customer account. He didn't say much. He typed for a moment, checked the account number from the passbook, and then slowly turned the screen toward me. "This account was opened in 1988, Robert said quietly. "Your wife deposited money into it every single year for 37 years. Not once did she miss a year." I swallowed hard. Eleanor had always earned an ordinary salary. I had never seen her show off wealth, never saw her buy anything extravagant. So, where had the money come from? Robert tapped a few more keys. The number that appeared on the screen made my vision blur. Sembai Sishutiwen Meyuenza, $3,470,000. I just sat there, stunned. My ears rang like someone had slapped me across the face. Robert watched my reaction for a moment, then spoke in a low, steady voice. "Now you understand why I asked whether that passbook had fallen into Maddie's hands." He leaned back slightly. "People don't throw trash away that quickly unless they're afraid of it." I stared at that number, and only one thought echoed in my head. Eleanor hadn't hidden that money to become rich. She had hidden it to prepare for a day like this. I was still trying to process the $3.47 million when Robert Shields quietly pulled out another folder. His voice dropped lower, more serious. "But this," he said, "is the real reason I said we needed to call the police." He turned the screen again and opened a section labeled Attempts. There were 7 entries listed. 7 separate attempts to withdraw or transfer money from this account using forged documents. Every single one had failed, blocked by the system, and by a special verification mechanism Eleanor herself had set up years earlier. Robert pointed at the dates. "They kept trying," he said, "but the account wouldn't release anything without the specific authorization protocol your wife left behind." He looked at me carefully. "Whoever is trying to access this money has been at it for a while. Robert clicked into each entry one by one. Each record showed a date, time, branch location, and the linked security footage. Then he opened the camera images. I looked at the screen, and it felt like my heart dropped straight into my stomach. Maddie, not once, all 7 times. Robert spoke slowly, like he was worried I might fall out of the chair. Every time she came in, she brought power of attorney documents. The signatures looked convincing, but they failed the verification layer. Your wife warned us about this possibility in advance. My hands tightened into fists. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe, because suddenly, the picture became painfully clear. Eleanor hadn't just saved money. She had built defenses around it, as if she already knew someone close to us would try to take it. By that point, Maddie was no longer just a hot-tempered daughter. She was someone trying to steal from her own mother. And worse than that, Eleanor had known. I was still stunned by the $3.47 million on the screen when Robert Shields pulled out another folder. His voice dropped lower. "But this," he said quietly, "is the real reason I said we have to call the police." He turned the laptop toward me again and opened a page labeled Attempts. 7 entries appeared on the screen. 7 separate attempts to withdraw or transfer money from this account using forged documents. Every one of them had failed. The system had locked the transactions because Eleanor had set up a special verification protocol years earlier. Robert clicked through them one by one. Each entry showed the date, the exact time, the branch location, and the security camera records. Then he opened the still images captured by the bank cameras. I looked at the images. Maddie, not once, all 7 times. Robert spoke slowly, like he was worried I might collapse out of the chair. Every time she came in, she brought power of attorney documents. The signatures looked convincing, but they failed the verification layer. Your wife warned us about this possibility in advance. My hands clenched so tight my knuckles hurt. For a moment I couldn't breathe, because at that point, Maddie was no longer just a hot-tempered daughter. She was someone trying to steal from her own mother. And the most chilling part, Eleanor had known this could happen. I slammed my hand on the desk and looked straight at Robert Shields. She came here 7 times. Why didn't the bank call the police earlier? Robert exhaled slowly and looked at me the way someone looks at a man who has just woken up from a long illusion. We wanted to report it, he said, but your wife, Eleanor, specifically asked us not to. I went completely still. Robert opened an internal note in the system. Eleanor's signature was right there at the bottom. The instructions were clear. Every time someone attempted to withdraw money using forged documents, the bank had to lock the transaction, preserve the security footage, and archive the paperwork. But they were not allowed to contact the family and not allowed to report it to the police. Yet not until there was a complete chain of attempts, strong enough to guarantee a conviction. Eleanor wanted every attempt documented, every forged document, every appearance on camera. Robert spoke carefully, his voice steady. Your wife knew Maddie wouldn't stop after failing once. She expected her to come back again and again. He paused, letting the weight of it sink in. Eleanor was building a trap. A legal one. I sat there, completely frozen, because by that point, I understood something clearly. Eleanor hadn't hidden the money out of greed. She had hidden it to protect the family. From our own daughter. Robert Shields stood up, walked to a locked file cabinet in his office, and placed a thick envelope on the desk. On top of it lay a small key. Eleanor didn't just leave money, he said. She also left a safe deposit box. And she wrote very clearly, "This is to be given to Frank Harlow only when he comes to the bank alone." I picked up the key, and my hand felt suddenly cold. Robert led me downstairs to the safe deposit vault. He unlocked the compartment, registered under Eleanor's name, and slid the box open. Inside, there were no jewelry pieces, no family heirlooms. Instead, there was a neatly organized stack of documents, arranged almost like an investigation file. At the very top were copies of the withdrawal attempts Maddie had made, along with the corresponding security camera images from the bank. There were forged power of attorney documents, fake signatures. There was also a handwritten notebook from Eleanor. Inside it, she had recorded dates, moments when Maddie's behavior started to change, the times she asked questions about money, and one name that appeared again and again, underlined several times: Derek Morrison. At the bottom of the stack was a sealed letter addressed to me. On the front it read, "If you are reading this, it means Maddie has revealed herself." I just sat there, unable to move, because Eleanor hadn't waited around, hoping her daughter would suddenly become a better person. She had already prepared the path to bring everything crashing down with evidence. I left the bank with my head spinning. When I got home, I didn't confront Maddie right away. Instead, I asked Sophie to come into my study. I closed the door and placed Eleanor's file on the desk in front of us. Sophie looked at the stack of papers, then looked at me, her eyes already filling with worry, and quietly I said, "Sophie, it's time you tell me the truth. Sophie, what do you know about Derek Morrison?" Her face went pale. She looked down at her hands and stayed silent for a long time, before finally whispering, "Dad, Derek isn't just someone she knows. He's the one leading Maddie." Sophie told me she had seen Maddie meet Derek several times at parking lots, at small cafes. Once, Derek had even stood at the end of our street, waiting like someone expecting a delivery. And every time Maddie came home after seeing him, something about her changed. She became tense, sharp, easily irritated. She kept asking me questions about paperwork, about bank accounts, about whether their mother had left anything behind. Then, Sophie said something that made my blood run cold. I once heard Maddie say to Derek, something like, "As long as we get the book, it's over." At that point, a quiet certainty settled in my chest. This hadn't started with grief. It had started with a plan. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. Maddie hadn't just suddenly turned into a monster on her own. Either she had been pulled into something, or she had willingly stepped into it. Derek Morrison was the hook, and the passbook was the bait. I looked at Sophie and made a quiet decision. "All right," I told her. "From now on, I'm not playing this with emotions anymore. I'm playing it with evidence." After I handed Eleanor's file over to the police, something happened exactly the way I suspected it might. Maddie wasn't a first-time offender. The investigator called me a few days later. They had started cross-checking cases with the same pattern. Forged power of attorney documents, forged signatures, attempts to withdraw money from elderly accounts, and Maddie's name started showing up in places it absolutely shouldn't. Other elderly people started coming forward. They said Maddie had once helped them. Sometimes it was presented as a safe investment. Sometimes as a charity donation opportunity. Other times it was an urgent home repair situation that needed quick money. On the surface, it always sounded reasonable, helpful, respectful, but the endings were always the same. The money disappeared, and the victims were gently steered into doubting themselves. Maybe you remembered wrong. Maybe the paperwork already went through. These things get confusing. And Derek Morrison? He wasn't just some random boyfriend or a careless partner. He was the one pulling the strings behind the scenes, finding targets, building the stories, setting the traps. Then he would send Maddie in as the clean face, the polite, trustworthy daughter figure who could walk up to older people without raising suspicion. By that point, I finally understood why Eleanor had spent 37 years building that trap. She wasn't just protecting the family from Maddie. She was trying to stop Maddie from becoming a full-fledged predator. After that, there was no such thing as a family conversation anymore. Family doesn't include forged signatures, stolen money, and bringing criminals right to your front door. So I took everything from the safe deposit box to the police station. The file was thick with evidence. 7 separate attempts by Maddie to withdraw or transfer money from Eleanor's account, each with the exact time, branch, and forged documents. Security camera images clearly showing Maddie at the bank. Eleanor's handwritten notes, listing the dates Maddie began asking about money and repeatedly underlining the name Derek Morrison. I placed the whole stack on the detective's desk, and, for the first time since Eleanor died, I felt something close to certainty, because this wasn't a family argument anymore. It was a case. Sophie's statement about Derek, the one pulling the strings, went into the file as well. When the police looked at the stack of evidence, thick like a full investigation dossier, no one in that room said the word misunderstanding anymore. I also did something extremely important. I locked down the account completely and asked the bank to place an immediate alert if Maddie or Derek ever showed up again. Robert Shields told me plainly, with this file on record, if they walk into the bank again. I didn't feel any sense of victory. What I felt instead was clarity. Eleanor had built a trap using the law itself, so that when the moment came, the guilty wouldn't have anywhere left to run. And when the police began calling Maddie in for questioning, one sentence settled firmly in my mind. My daughter may betray me, but the truth never will. That evening, Maddie came home like nothing had happened. She even asked if I had eaten dinner yet, playing the part of the normal daughter, trying to keep the rhythm of a regular family night. I didn't shout. I simply placed Eleanor's file on the table and opened it to the page that showed the security camera images and the list of 7 failed transactions. Maddie, explain this. Her face went pale for a split second. Then, the defenses snapped into place. Dad, who's been filling your head with this? Mom is gone. You're upset. And now you're imagining things. I calmly pointed at the photo on the page. That's you. Not my imagination. Right then, Maddie's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen, her eyes flicking quickly across the name. I heard her whisper just one word, under her breath. Derek. A few minutes later, a car pulled up outside the house. Derek Morrison stepped onto the porch. He didn't come inside, but he stood close enough to make sure his presence was felt. His voice carried through the doorway. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be, old man. I looked at him through the doorway, and for the first time since all of this started, I realized something important. They thought I was still the same man they could scare. They didn't know the police already had the file. They didn't know the bank had already locked everything down. And they definitely didn't know that Eleanor had already built the trap years before either of them realized it existed. So I simply closed the door and waited. I looked straight at him and said, my voice cold and steady, Eleanor spent 37 years preparing for this exact moment. You really think you can scare me? And in that instant, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about teaching my daughter a lesson anymore. This was the moment to lock the doors, lock the money, and let the law lock the hands that tried to steal it. Later that evening, Maddie came home as if nothing had happened. She even asked whether I'd eaten dinner yet, playing the role of the caring daughter, trying to keep the rhythm of a normal family. I didn't shout. I simply placed Eleanor's file on the table and opened it to the page, showing the security camera images and the list of 7 failed transactions. Maddie, explain this. Her face went pale for a single beat. Then the defenses came up instantly. Dad, who's been filling your head with this? Mom's gone. You're upset, and now you're imagining things. I pointed at the photo on the page. That's you. Not my imagination. Just then, Maddie's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her eyes flicking quickly across the name. I heard her whisper, one word under her breath. Derek. A few minutes later, a car pulled up outside the house. Derek Morrison stood on the porch. He didn't step inside, but he stayed close enough to make sure the threat carried through the doorway. Don't make this a big deal, old man, he said. Mess with us, and you'll regret it. I looked straight at him, my voice cold and steady. Eleanor spent 37 years preparing for this exact moment. You really think you can scare me? And right then, it hit me clearly. This wasn't about teaching my daughter a lesson anymore. This was the moment to lock the doors, lock the money, and let the law lock the hands. After Derek Morrison's threat, one thing became absolutely certain to me. This story wasn't going to end with a family argument in the living room. It was going to end in a courtroom. The police used everything Eleanor had carefully prepared, what one detective even called her war file. Along with the bank's records, it was enough to close the entire chain of crimes. The case against Maddie was built piece by piece. 7 separate attempts to withdraw or transfer money using forged documents, security camera footage clearly identifying her, forged signatures and falsified authorization forms, and the connection to Derek Morrison messages, meeting records, and the threats he made. When the case went to court, Maddie tried to play the victim. She told the judge, "I was only trying to help manage my father's assets. This is all a misunderstanding." But courtrooms don't run on emotions. They run on evidence, and the evidence Eleanor had left behind spoke louder than anything Maddie could say. The jury returned a verdict of guilty on multiple counts: forgery, identity theft, elder financial abuse, conspiracy. As for Derek Morrison, prosecutors went after him as the organizer behind the scheme, the one who found targets, built the scams, and pushed others to carry them out. He was charged as a co-conspirator and ringleader for coordinating the fraud and issuing threats. I stood there in the courtroom when the verdict was read. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel satisfaction. All I could think about was Eleanor. She had stayed quiet for 37 years, not because she was weak, but because she was patient enough to wait for the exact moment when the truth would crush the people who deserved it. After Derek Morrison's threat at my door, I knew there was only one way this could end. In a courtroom, not in another argument inside my house. So the police built the case using everything Eleanor had prepared, what they eventually started calling her war file. Piece by piece, the evidence closed the circle. 7 attempts by Maddie to withdraw or transfer money using forged documents. Security camera footage clearly identifying her at the bank. Forged signatures and falsified authorization forms. And the connection between Maddie and Derek messages, meeting records, and even the threats he made. By the time the case reached trial, the story wasn't about family anymore. It was about proof. And Eleanor had left more than enough of it. In court, Maddie still tried to play the victim. I was only helping my father manage his assets. "This is all a misunderstanding," she told the judge. But that kind of performance doesn't work in a courtroom. A courtroom doesn't listen to stories, it looks at evidence. And the evidence Eleanor had prepared was impossible to ignore. The jury returned a verdict of guilty on multiple counts: forgery, identity theft, elder financial abuse, conspiracy. Derek Morrison was prosecuted as well, charged as a co-conspirator and the one pulling the strings behind the scheme, planning the setup, issuing threats, and coordinating the fraud. I stood there when the verdict was read. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. All I could think about was Eleanor. She had stayed silent for 37 years, not because she was weak, but because she was patient enough to wait for the one day when the truth would crush the people who deserved it. After the trial ended, I realized something painful. The worst part wasn't the money. The worst part was knowing I had been living under the same roof with someone willing to sell out her own mother just to chase a few numbers in a bank account. I did recover most of what Eleanor had left behind, but I never got back that old feeling that home is automatically a safe place. That part doesn't come back so easily. What I did gain, though, was a lesson carved deep enough that I'll never forget it. When someone rushes to tell you, "Just throw that away," ask yourself one thing: what are they afraid you might keep? And when someone tries to label you as confused, grieving, or imagining things, don't argue. Check the paper trail. Check the money, because feelings can be manipulated, but records don't lie. And don't blind yourself just because someone is your own child. Blood doesn't excuse theft. As for Sophie, the girl finally started breathing again. She was never weak. She just needed one adult willing to stand up and face the truth. Eleanor spent 37 years preparing for the day I would finally wake up. I won't let her down.